These 10 principles are the principles of the 613 mitzvot. They are divided into categories between man and God, between man and man. And we developed our first major exception to the rule. All mitzvahs are equal, but laws between man and man are a double. They are commanded by God, but they also fulfill a very important aspect of mitzvah, man to fellow man. And hence, 13 proofs I gave in the book, which you read, explaining and proving that they are more significant. The question, of course, is then, if they are really more significant, why do they come at the end? Why don't they start the tablets and what we used to call the commandments, but now call the principles? The answer is because, as I explain, what we are really saying is something that is all important and something that I want to expand upon a bit further here in our lecture. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God, comes first, not because it is more important, but because you can't really have a full and complete, a real and honest, bein adam lechavero, between man and fellow man, predicated on a law that must be observed if it isn't rooted first in a firm belief in the fact that God said so and God commanded it and there is a God. What I'm really saying to you is secular humanism is an impossibility. In the words of Dostoevsky, without God all is possible. Without God you have moral relativism. Without God, it is just as valid to say that you can murder in certain situations as it is to say you can't. Suppose I set up a system of racial superiority. Suppose I create a philosophic system whereby the old are to be destroyed because they deny the young chance to have room on this earth. Suppose I say only blonde-haired, blue-eyed people deserve to be on this earth. Suppose I set up racial criteria. Suppose I set up mental criteria. And I don't simply mean in terms of life. I mean for almost any law. One could say it makes sense or it doesn't make sense. One can be a cultural relativist. Benjamin, you have a question.
Yeah, we talked about how the first tablet is like a prerequisite for the second tablet. How you need Anochi Hashem. How you need belief in God as a prerequisite for the mitzvahs between man and man. I mean, I might know atheists who are good people. Could you clarify the whole issue?
Of course. I'm very glad you did ask that because it should be clarified and I don't want any room for error. Nowhere did we claim or did anyone say atheists can't be good people. I know many atheists who are very good people. They may have found a source for their ethical behavior in other ways and other sources than God. They have been brought up the right way. They have a conscience. They feel that that's what the right thing is to do. But what I was really trying to say is there are moments that are testing moments. There are ultimate moments. I have a friend who grew up in Germany and who was there through Kristallnacht and beyond. He told me the story. He had neighbors with whom they shared the most wonderful relationship. They would borrow from each other. They would attend each other's festivities, birthdays, parties, etc. They probably would have been good neighbors for the rest of their days until it became illegal to befriend a Jew, until it was not in their best interest to be friends or kind to their neighbors, the Jews. Their best friends turned them into the Nazis. Their best friends were responsible for them going to concentration camp. What I'm trying to say is that atheists can be very good most of their lives. The true test is a moment when it becomes it's me or them. And that test is going to determine an ultimate priority. Logically, unless you have no choice because you believe in a God who commanded you to do something, it is a command that you have no choice about, then the probability is, and I stress that word probability, the probability is you will do what is logical. And without God, it very often becomes logical to do everything that is in your best interest, because you are number one. Unless Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, hear Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, unless there is a higher number one than this number one. I think what we're really getting at is something that Dennis Prager pointed out in a very fascinating discussion that I'd like to share with you. I think it'll help clarify what you just said. He asked his son in the aftermath of the riots in Los Angeles, when everybody witnessed the tremendous looting, the rioting, he said he asked his 9-year-old son if he would loot if he really wanted something and could get away with it like the people we were watching. He said no, which I expected. I was interested in his response to the next question, why not? And Prager says with pride that his son responded because it's against the 10 Commandments. And now here he makes the extremely important point. While my son gave the answer that I wanted, most educated parents would want a different answer to that question. They would want their child to answer because I feel it is wrong. That's the difference between the religious hierarchy of authority view and the liberal secular no hierarchy of authority view. The highest level of morality in secular thinking is that you feel it is wrong, and I want my child to feel it is wrong. And Prager correctly makes this all-important point. Judaism holds the opposite view. There's a remarkable statement in the Talmud. A person who does something because he is commanded by God is greater than one who does it without being commanded. This runs entirely against the modern outlook, which holds that the highest good is good not done out of obligation, but because one feels it is good. What could be more noble than doing right from inner feeling? The answer is that for the good of society, it is far preferable to do what is right out of obligation to a higher authority as well as from an inner conviction. If we rely only on everyone doing what he or she feels is right, society is doomed. Feel is right? Well, the Nazis, after a short while, also felt that what they were doing was right. It was right on racist grounds. It was right because it was genetically improving their world, their people. One can rationalize that almost anything is right, and unless we have a stronger base for our obligations, a base that says it's wrong, I don't care what you think, because you'll think one thing and he'll think another. We could get a room full of 10 people and we can discuss abortion, we can discuss murder in certain instances, euthanasia, we can discuss a host of different areas and we'll get different opinions. I can justify almost anything. And I'm going with my gut feeling, and don't you appreciate my feeling? I appreciate your feeling and your feeling and your feeling. And the trouble is, we'll have so many different feelings that will result in so many different actions that society won't be able to be certain of your correct response. Is there a correct response? If you believe in a God who gave a law, then there is a correct response. Then there's a right way and a wrong way. If you deal with feelings, then perhaps you have a right to loot. After all, you're making up for past injustices. You can create a whole set of different answers to questions of morality based on feelings. I'll just give you another example that puts it into perspective, and again, it's an example that I take from Prager, where he did a study. Prager asked a very fascinating question. He asked it of high school seniors around the country. Would you save your dog or a stranger first if both were drowning? He says in every instance that he's asked it, 1/3 voted for the dog, 1/3 for the stranger, and 1/3 didn't know. The question's too difficult. And he begins to discuss it. He says he can understand why. If there is no God imperative, I know the dog, I love the dog, that's my response. I am not ordered by anyone or by any cardinal law to save a human being because a human being is higher, because it is obvious that a human being must be saved because a human being is in the image of God. If there is no God, there is no image of God, and my dog is dearer to me. I think the follow-up to that study, which he finally concluded after many years, is even more fascinating. He says, now, when he asks the question, his focus of interest has changed. He says, I asked the students who would vote to save the person, would you say that the students who voted to save the dog are wrong? And not one student in all the years I've asked this has said that the students who would save their dog first are wrong. Their argument is always the same. Listen, I feel that I should save the person, but they feel they should save their dog. So even the people who voted for person over dog still agree that other people have the same right to choose dog as they have to choose person. And that is absurd. That says we all have a right to our feelings. And if you feel you love your dog more than a human being, I guess it's your right to go with your feelings. Go for it. That's why moral relativism simply won't work. Believe it or not, there is a right and there is a wrong. How do I know? Because God said so. I must share with you a story that was extremely meaningful to me and to my colleagues, fellow students at Yeshiva University, when we studied under Rabbi Soloveitchik. And I will never forget a story that he told us that really inspired my colleagues and all of students in his class. He, as you know, received a PhD in philosophy from the University of Heidelberg. He had a professor who was internationally renowned as an ethicist, a master of understanding of principles of morality and ethics. And he would, in the early 30s, explain why it was so correct and so right to be ethical. And he would expand ethics into a universal concept that was absolutely magnificent. And then, with the rise of the Nazis, as it became expedient for him to follow Nazi policy if he wanted to maintain his position in the university, with the same brilliance that he was able to defend, explain, and rationalize ethics for everybody, he was able to equally justify, explain, and rationalize why it was correct to persecute Jews and why freedoms did not belong to those who were racially inferior. Rabbi Soloveitchik said that the Nazi era proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that reason alone cannot be counted upon to be reasonable, because reason can rationalize. Therefore, you need Anochi, I am the Lord your God, and the first tablet between man and God, not because it's most important, but because without that first step, you'll never get to the second. What we ought to do is to say that tablet number 1 is the ideal preparation for tablet number 2. 1 is the means to the end. The end, the goal, is tablet number 2, Bein Adam L'Chavero, between man and fellow man. But the way to get there is from tablet 1. How fascinating that the first word in the Aseret HaDibrot in the 10 principles is Anochi, I, which refers to God. Do you know what the last word in the Aseret HaDibrot is? L'reyecha, to your neighbor. From Anochi to L'reyecha. That is the theme of the Dibrot, the 10 principles, and that is the only possible methodology for moving from one to the other.